I just want to explore and raise really four main areas today. One is looking at this kind of new history of partition in terms of our kind of discipline and how we've tried to document this. The other is looking at the kind of transformation of urban spaces and cities and the impact that has had on the spaces in which we live. Thirdly, looking at memorialization and the legacy in terms of how we recollect those events, how those memories are preserved around us. And lastly, I'll dwell a little bit around the issue of language, particularly Punjabi language, and the way in which this kind of new landscape, the role of language and how it's really been reimagined in this new political context. So, in terms of the book itself, it talks a lot about cities, it talks about places, it talks about refugees, rehabilitation, it talks about starting your life all over again for many of the refugees. And I would say I'm one of the few scholars. I was very lucky that at the time I was working with Professor Herbert. And so I'm one of the few scholars who's been...
Sorry, you were working with?
Ian Talbot. Yeah, he's written extensively on Pakistan. And so I've been lucky in the sense that I'm one of those privileged people who's able to travel easily between the two Punjabs. And I think increasingly I'm, feeling very sort of privileged myself in that, how easy it is for me to travel, yet the people around me, it's something which is impossible. For most people, it's impossible, even if they have good connections to be able to get visas. So it just shows you how much that the last 70 years have translated into a hard border, which separates and continually separates the people. And in a sense, from the stories that I collected, and this is based largely on oral accounts of people from both Punjabs, is that early period, especially the first 10 years, the border was a lot more fluid. There were people who were coming and going across the border, and I spent time in Malay Kotla, which is one of the early Muslim princely states in East Punjab. And when I spoke to some of the Muslims living there, they talked about how they used to get marriages, and they would come to Pakistan side because this is where they would find Punjabi grooms or Punjabi brides for their children. So there was this kind of interaction that existed at that level that completely then got cut off. So within this oral history of partition, I think there's two very distinct features, particularly of this new history. And the first one is, although not exclusively, it's mostly female writers and scholars who have tried to embrace a new kind of agenda in terms of trying to talk about people's emotions, those kind of sensitive issues, taboo subjects, which we really, were afraid of trying to talk about. And what they've tried to do is capture those life stories, those human stories of pain and suffering, and try to articulate that in some structure, which we can then sort of disseminate amongst the people. And I think it's that female gaze which has been particularly important in the last 20 years, with prominent writers like Rita Menon, Kamla Basim, Urvashi Batalia, who started this process in the late 1990s, that started using oral history as a way of trying to integrate women into historical scholarship. And I'm very kind of grateful for that, because it was only shortly after that that I started doing my research. The other dimension of this new history, though, also was that it was predominantly India-centric. So much of the scholarly work that was being done was actually on the Indian side of the border as opposed to this side of the border. And I would say that that still largely holds true. When we look at comparatively, there is much more work that's been done on the Indian side. We've got the Lahore-based activist and writer Nikhil Singh Khan. She's collected quite a lot of stories, and she's written some work around this. But other than that, and the work that I've done, women have been completely left out of this kind of work. And so I think it's very important, firstly, for me to try to then incorporate those accounts into mainstream history. So we don't treat women just as a separate subject, but they're part of the mainstream orthodox history as we understand it. Because they shouldn't be treated as a special case. They belong in the history books of our nation's history, and in trying to understand their contributions, and not just looking at them merely as victims of partition, but the roles that they played in this process of rebuilding lives particularly. The other thing actually, which is also true, so not only is it largely India-centric, but it is also, I would say, Punjab and Bengal-centric. So other than looking at these two areas, there's little understanding of how this has an impact on some of the other peripheral places. So for example, looking at places like UP or Bihar, which actually experienced a lot of violence, which experienced a lot of upheaval, but how do some of these other places fit into this wider equation? So rather than just looking at merely at this kind of Radcliffe line and the impact of the boundary, how does the geographic landscape become completely transformed? And within that transformation then is also looking at, cities and urban cityscapes. And of course, places like Delhi, which was the colonial capital, was completely transformed from this Urdu-speaking Muslim city in character into a city which then largely inhabited Punjabi refugees. So the character of Delhi today has much more of a Punjabi flavor in terms of its people, but its architecture and its surroundings are very much Mughal-inspired and then colonial inspired. Yet the people, in terms of the language, the cuisine, the culture, is now very much influenced by that Punjabi refugee that goes over from this side of Punjab. So in that way, we have to now sort of look at Punjab, Delhi, in a completely different way. For Punjab, this also means that when that Radcliffe line is drawn, that some of these cities are completely transformed. We know very well about Lahore, or at least I hope some of you have a good understanding of the way Lahore is completely transformed after 1947, once the Sikh and Hindu populations leave. And with them, of course, there is a huge impact on the local economy, on the local infrastructure demographic and the communal makeup of the city. And in that way, I explored two cities in particular, looking at Ludhiana in East Punjab and Lahore over here, Faisalabad, better known as Faisalabad, I should say. Or I think I should say it's still known as Lahore, even though it's renamed Faisalabad. So these two cities, for me, were a great sort of, in a way, a point in which we could try to understand the way the landscape gets completely shifted. So both of them have around 62% of the other population. So Ludhiana city has 62% Muslims, and Lahore over here has 62% Hindus and Sikhs. And so there's that complete out-migration of people. But these towns, and there were towns before 1947, have now been completely changed with these huge refugees coming into these places. And how does that then impact on the local spaces of Ludhiana and Lahore? One is that kind of exchange in a sense of the skills with which people are migrating with. So just to give you one example. So in Ludhiana, for example, skilled Muslim workers dominated the flour and rice mills with 83% of the workers. So 83% of the rice mill workers in Ludhiana were from the Muslim community. 61% of them worked in the textile industry. 78% of them worked in, 61% worked in the grocery industry, 78% worked in the textile industry. So the skilled Muslim labor basically dominated the cottage industry workforce of Ludhiana. Now, you can imagine, with this total out-migration of that population, what impact that has on the city. And conversely, then these people who then migrate, and many of them come to places like Lahore. Lahore goes from a city which is dominated by Hindus, by Muslims. Sorry, just seeing my friend. So Lahore goes from a place dominated by Hindus and Sikhs to now being dominated by these refugees coming in. And with them are these skills which they're bringing along with them to try to reinvent in many ways the cityscape. And they play a very important part in how Lahore rebuilds as a city, as does Ludhiana. One of the two sort of distinct features I saw in both Ludhiana and Lahore, and this might be something which we can sort of have a discussion about, was that in Ludhiana it was a cottage industry, and it was still the small scale and medium scale industry that survived. So even the incoming refugees, that's what they built their strength on. And secondly, most of the people who rebuilt that city after 47 lived in the city. Right? So they had an invested interest to rebuild the city. But in Lahore, I found that there was a lot of state investment going on in Lahore. So the industry was very much large-scale textile industrial development. But also, many of the big industrialists didn't actually live in Lahore themselves. They lived largely outside and mostly in Lahore, or then later on in Islamabad area. And so actually whilst their work was in Lahore, they didn't actually have an invested, you would say, interest in the local city itself. But these places, both of these places, in a sense, benefited from partition because the border becomes such a sensitive area. So when we look at Amritsar, Firozpur, Gurdaspur on the Indian side of the border, industry completely declines in these areas because the border now is a very sensitive border. And so people migrate inwards to places like Delhi, or Ludhiana to some extent, and Jalandhar, where they begin their new industries. So there's been this kind of, fundamental shift of the economic vibrancy of these places, and of course, the kind of, the Lahore had a very, important relationship with the city of Amritsar. Amritsar, after 47, completely declines, both as an industry and, of course, prior to partition, it was a Muslim-dominated city. The economic heart of that city thrived on the skills of Muslims, but this completely declines. The other sort of lesser explored area, and I want to sort of also try to bring this dimension into it, is that today when we look at Punjab, whether we're talking about East Punjab or West Punjab, we largely focus on discussions on Sikhs or Muslims. But what we forget is that there's a significant Hindu Punjabi population. There's a significant Christian Punjabi population. There were also a small number of Parsis and Jains. And also I don't know the statistics because they don't count them on this side, but certainly on the East Punjab, we have a 30% plus Dalit population. So that kind of Dalit population. So that's a significant number of people who then belong to other communities, which gives that kind of Punjab a very plural character. And that was the whole problem of trying to understand Punjab, particularly in 47. How do you now unmix these populations that are so integrated and mixed up in these various areas? Yes, you might have a slight majority over here, and it's kind of, logical to have a line, but actually the character of Punjab was very diverse and mixed, and very pluralistic in that sense. So that unmixing has been part of the problem of trying to really, in a way, undo that partition that we were talking about. And of course, when now we try to, in a sense, document and understand these lives, it's surprising that actually there is no meaningful memorial anywhere to commemorate the lives that have been lost, and there were millions of lives that perished. We are talking about 14 million plus people who were forced to flee their homes. So we're not talking about something which is small scale, but of course one of the problems was that when we look at it from a Western perspective, much of what was happening here was I would say, or Ashish Nandi also makes this argument, it paled in comparison to what was happening in Europe, particularly following World War II and the kind of, the Holocaust. So compared to what was happening there, this was very much, peripheral and marginal on the radar. But it fundamentally changed the lives of people in parts of the subcontinent. And so there is nothing there to really commemorate, to try to promote peace between the people, and there's no kind of discourse around it, because there's so much public anxiety about this issue that I think there's always been this kind of amnesia that would rather just not talk about this. We brush it to one side and let's just think about the future. well, there's a big question mark about what is the future in terms of the kind of relationship that we have with each other. And although there have been many kind of attempts to sort of try to have some sort of museum or memorial, there have been various Aman Ki Asha, Indo-Bangla friendship groups. There's been sort of Friends Without Borders, Asia Peace, various small groups over the years have tried to promote better dialogue, and nothing has really sort of come off it. And most recently, for 2017, on the Indian side, there's been a People's Museum, or an attempt to have a People's Museum called the Partition Museum, which is in Amritsar. It's in the renovated town hall building, and I was lucky enough to visit it earlier in 2017 when they were setting it up. But actually, I found a number of things about it problematic, in the sense that how can you have a truly representative history of people, because we live in such polarized countries in terms of our nation state's history. It's so polarized. How can we represent everyone's viewpoint? It's just very, very difficult. They had a little tree in the museum where students came and little leaflets, little notes, and those notes were so jingoistic, some of them, and I just thought, well, this isn't representative. For example, Bharat Mata ki Jai. Our country is great. We're familiar with those kind of terms. And the other thing is, which I found again ironical, is that some of those events that the Partition Museum was talking about was co-funded by the British Council. Funded by the British Council. So, on the one hand, you're talking about partition, but on the other hand, you've now got the British Council who is, helping you to commemorate this. There's some irony in that. And added to some of this kind of public, discourse that people have been trying is, there have been various American projects which some people here are involved in. There's a project at Harvard and one at Stanford. There's the 1947 Partition Archive, which is all these kind of attempts at crowdsourcing. Let's get some students, volunteers together, you go and collect testimonies. But part of the problem, again, there is that there's no critical engagement in how you're crowdsourcing this information, how you're storing it, what you're trying to achieve by gathering this information. So there are a lot of in terms of methodology, I think, there are a lot of questions that need to be kind of raised around this. And most recently in the UK, and I was asked to be a part of this myself, is there's been these attempts, particularly again after 2017, 70 years of partition, the BBC was doing a lot of programs in the UK, was that they've started a group, a committee that's looking to have 17th August as a commemoration day, a partition commemoration day. 17th August is chosen because that's actually the day that the award was declared as opposed to 14th, 15th August. And I find it very again, very problematic that I'm sitting in the UK. I've got British Asians who are spearheading this project, supported by members of Parliament, and they want to have a commemoration day in Britain for a day which they're responsible for. There's something wrong in that. And I've raised my kind of concerns about this, but I think I'm kind of going against the wind with my concerns about this, because from their point of view, what they're trying to do is raise awareness, educate people about this. Chalo. But there's a lot of sort of issues around how we then remember this, which is, I think, fundamentally linked to then this idea of how we reimagine our land. How do we want to remember those events, and how do we want to, build a relationship with our neighbours and ethnically people who are, the same as us. So these are very kind of important issues which hardly ever get sort of talked about. Now the problem partly for Punjab, and I'll end on this kind of, please note, I'll end on this this kind of final area. Part of the problem for Punjab was that, unlike Bengal, we had Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs here, 3 significant communities, alongside then these other smaller minorities as well. So that makes it very sort of toxic in the sense that when we start to then sort of talk about dividing up this land, we're not just talking about 2 communities, we're talking about 3 communities, and we're talking about a very plural and integrated community. So it's not very easy to separate them. And added to then that is then this idea of, well, okay, we have this mass migration, which largely starts after the Radcliffe Line is awarded. The Boundary Commission makes its award, and it's the violence that starts afterwards that prompts people to flee their homes, not as such, the fact that there is going to be a creation of Pakistan. And many of the records actually show that there was no preparation for any movement of population either. So people were not anticipating this movement to take place. And so there was very little planning into that movement. And so when it happens, it's completely, caught off guard. And the ways in which now, this kind of movement takes place is that we see again in the way that people have reimagined the spaces around them and the ways in which they take part of their old self with them. And one of the kind of easiest ways in which you can see that is in the spaces and their businesses around us. So if I give you one very lovely example of the 2 cities that I was working in, is that in Ludhiana there's a very prominent Mathaiwala called Lalpur Sweet Shop, and in Lalpur there's a lovely little shop in the main bazaar called Ludhiana Sweet Shop, right? So these 2 cities that I was interested in, and this is just kind of one example, there are hundreds of other examples in the ways in which people have tried to hang on to that former identity. And it's through this kind of, ways in which they've tried to retain this older self of them. And the other is through language. So the one thing you can't change is the language that we speak. So when you go to Lahore, you'll find a lot of people who speak with the same dialect as I do, because many of them come from the Doaba area. And of course, they take their language with them, and is passed on through generations. And of course, it is the language. It's been one of the ways in which the territorial division has really been cemented through this communalized identity. Because what has happened, and part of the problem is historic. So just to give you that kind of context that, during kind of Ranjit Singh's period and through the colonial period, it is Persian and Urdu which is the court language. Punjabi was never really the court language here. It's the spoken language of the masses, but it's not the court language. And part of the problem arose from the fact that you have 3 different scripts. You have Devanagari, Gurmukhi, and the Persian Indo-Persian script. And because none of them dominated, you can't gravitate towards one script. So it's easier in many ways for the colonial power to reach out to Urdu and say, we'll use Urdu here. And of course, people of my father's generation and many others were all educated in the Persian script. But what has happened, and this is the more sort of painful legacy, is that the language has been communalized. So the Punjabi language itself has been communalized to the extent that the people who do speak Punjabi on this side of the border associated with the Indo-Persian script. On the Indian side, what you have is that East Punjab very quickly adopts Gurmukhi, and it's really post-47 that wide-scale education takes place in the Gurmukhi script. And the Hindu Punjabi automatically gravitates towards the Devanagari. And of course the Hindu then becomes gradually absorbed into the wider Hindutva project. And the East Punjabi, which then becomes Punjab, because they very quickly drop East Punjab from their name, it becomes synonymous with Sikh history, right? So it becomes communalized and associated with Sikh history, and of course, ultimately then also Khalistan. And over here, it gets absorbed into the wider Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And so, in a sense, that legacy has been not just dividing people, not just dividing territory, but actually communalizing the way in which we communicate and talk with each other. To the extent that I think this has really now separated us. And the one way in which we can still talk is through the oral tradition. I mean, the problem of the script, I think, still remains in terms of, well, if we're trying to create a wider kind of Punjabi, forum of whatever nature it might be. And I've, used to run the Punjab Research Group for 7 years in the UK. And it worked very well because the language spoken was either English or Punjabi. And if it's not written, it's easily, easy for everyone to be able to communicate with each other. So there's still an issue really of that kind of communication and that communalization of that Punjabi identity, which is really sort of being sort of embedded. And I think, more so, you see this in recent years, particularly the way events are going in India. There are a handful of people who've tried to counter this kind of narrative in terms of trying to look at relics and try to look at a past which is a bit more sort of nuanced, which is a bit more mixed. And we've got people like Charanjit Maan, who's doing the GT Road project, Ajay Bhardwaj, who's a film documentary maker, Indian-based, but currently in Vancouver. He's been doing some kind of wonderful work around this. And there's also, I forget his name, it's Dr. Snehi. He's also been working on the Sufi tradition and the Sufi shrines left in East Punjab as well. Because of course the Sufi shrines is very much an integral part of Punjabi culture. To the extent that, my kind of ancestral village, there's a historic Gurdwara and there's a Sufi shrine. And when you go to the Gurdwara, you do your mannat. The hearsay and the historical sort of tradition is you can't go to the Gurdwara without going to the Sufi shrine as well. And only then will your mannat annual blessing be complete. And so there are all these number of these kind of examples in places in which we see these small ways in which we try to kind of preserve that history. But I think one of the things about the kind of oral histories is that as people of that generation disappear, along with them is also that history of a very different Punjab which will disappear. And I think I will stop there. So thank you for your patience, listening attentively.
Thank you, Dr. Virdee. And it has roused so many comments in my mind and so many questions. So if you permit me, I'll make a few brief remarks based on your talk. I think the first thing that struck me about what you said was how important aspects of the lives of the communities have been obliterated from memory and history. To illustrate, for example, there's very little that at least I have come across, and I lay no claim to expertise in the field. There's very little on residual communities. People who, despite the violence and despite communalism and despite now religion as an identity marker, remain behind. The Lahore that I grew up in had all those residual communities that you have mentioned in your talk. My best friend was a Hindu boy. We had Parsis, we had Christians, we had Anglo-Indians. My Hindu friend's family, who live in Anarkali here, left Pakistan after the 65 war because the mob arrived to burn their house and shop down. And I lost touch with them, I'm sorry to say. But many of our other communities, Christians and Anglo-Indians, incrementally and gradually left Pakistan because the space for them was shrinking here in terms of, increasingly assertive Islamic identity. And so we lost all that. So residual communities is one area I think that needs examination.
Can I just add one important factor there? And I think this is very important today. In particularly thinking about the Indian Muslim.
Yes.
Because that's not a small community.
That's a big residual.
That's a big residual community, which when, Jinnah is imagining Pakistan, there is very little consideration of what is going to happen to the Muslim community left behind. And it's those dilemmas which are really, I think, challenging India today in terms of how do we deal with those.
And in fact, those residual communities increasingly are under attack. The second aspect I think forgotten is women. Now you talked about the writing in India around this subject, not simply as victims, also as contributors and as actors. And I think if I recall correctly, it is the 50th anniversary of independence in 1997. Just before, during and after, then there was a whole kind of plethora of publications in India, oral histories and others. And the women question was very much part of that literature. We had comparatively little in Pakistan, as you pointed out, to my regret, because I think, I've said before, memory and history are so important to learn. Now you mentioned that there was an attempt to almost obliterate from memory the violence, the carnage, the massacres that had happened. Partly the communal atmosphere that emerged, partly the lack of preparation of the colonial authorities. So when trains of people were going this way or that way, and they often met along the way and massacred each other. So you had more than our fair share, shall we say, of bloodshed. The obliteration of memory is not something that we are unfamiliar with, not just in relation to partition and independence, but also in relation to what happened in 1971 in East Pakistan. We've obliterated that memory. There are generations of young people that I have met, hired, and talked to, who didn't know, had never been told that Bangladesh was once part of Pakistan. I'm telling you that. Talk about obliteration. It's all been, as you say, swept under the rug. And any society, any people, any community that does not remember and therefore refuses to learn from history, what is it condemned to do? We all know. You spoke of communalized identities, and I think the example in East Punjab is very relevant because we now have 3 states that emerged out of East Punjab. Punjab, Haryana and Himachal Pradesh. Okay? So East Punjab as it emerged in 1947 no longer exists. There are 3 states and they are communal in character or in identity. And you also spoke about West Punjab being absorbed into the narrative of an Islamic state. And I spoke about that in my introductory remarks, so I won't say more on that. I think the tragedy of partition and independence and all that followed is that religion became the marker of identity. And in the old days, we didn't talk about identity, we talked about nationality. In the political literature, that is the term used. But in the postmodern world, it's now all about identity politics versus identity that. So if we look back at our own history and this history, in terms of how identity, the marker became religion, and what were the after effects and the fallout and the tragedies that followed, I think it is a cautionary tale. Religion is a divider, not a uniter. Thank you.
And I might read you a small poem, if you don't mind, which is very much about that, because I end the book with a small poem from Balraj Sami, from his Mera Pakistani is a Firmano. And it was written during his visit to Amritsar in 1951. And if I just, I'm just going to read the last part of it. So he says, this is a translation. Half a heart reclines here, half a heart lies neglected there. The parts for which our hearts once beat, for those parts we became strangers. What of our becoming human beings? We have turned into Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. And that's where the book actually ends, because that is the point, that actually after this period, we're not known by anything other than largely our religious communalized identity. A process which starts, back in the 19th century, that culminates with this.
You know that Balraj Sami finally left India and became famous there, actor, and so on and so forth. But he was, if I'm not mistaken, a GC graduate and very much a son of God. And his angst at having to forego his home, his homeland, and his culture and his way of life is expressed not only in that poem but in many others. There it is. Floor is open.
This one advice for me. This bill, Dharam Mubad, that is also based on the same thing. Where ridiculous partition. It says to go back, it's all finance offenses. But just a few remarks that you said, and I would like to go to the comment on that. Firstly, I think that
Could you speak up a little?
I think that not fine. Speak.
आवाज मुझे
नहीं सुनाई दे रहा है, बहुत
उसकी से बोलिए
Next time I hope I will without it. Firstly, I think that what this lecture was very unique, and we don't get this thing like this very often. Mostly subjects which are relatively more contemporary. I think it's very important to have discussed because I don't think that there can be any future without the past. And unless we understand the past and put it in the correct perspective, I don't think that we will reach anything more concrete. What we have to do in the coming period ahead. So firstly, on this issue of the impact of
Just move it down.
I think I'll do that. I'll do but well, firstly, I think that the impact of the 46 February the revolt of the sailors and movement that arose there had huge impact in Punjab and elsewhere. And I think that whole episode has been consciously reduced or cut out.
Bombay Revolt.
The sailors revolt from Madras, Bombay, Karachi is led to the general strike, the Royal Indian Air Force, Royal Indian Army, and then there will be textile strikes, it led to the railway strikes, and then they came to stats. There were two important statements, one by General John Auckland, who was Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army in India, and the second was Lord Bayble, and later on by Clement Attlee himself, that is because of that revolt that we had to flee the Indian subcontinent. I think, I don't know whether we touched this in the book or not. I think it had a big impact on how the partition itself was accelerated, was sped up. They had to leave by 1949. They left 2 years earlier. That was one of the main reasons. And secondly, the role played by Jinnah Patel and everybody in this lot. In
The Governor General. What was his name? No, the Governor General at Bombay.
Viceroy.
No, I'm talking about the drafted politicians in India. And I think all of them played a very important role. How you will find how to crush that revolt. Now, I think I don't, this is not proper occasion to go into that, but I think at some stage this has to be worked, because I've talked to people, some of the descendants of those sailors started to do, along with some of the railway works and India came to stand still because of that general strike of 1946. The second point, I think, which is very important, is I think the Ghana and Lahore are very important cities which actually show how Punjab has been perverted or has been distorted in different ways. Firstly, as you correctly pointed out, that most of the discussion, the writings, the literature we get is mostly from what is today East Punjab. But not less than today, but some small details are very important. Even being Punjabis, those Muslims who came from East Punjab to West Punjab have still, after 71 years, not been absorbed culturally and socially. Even being Punjabis themselves, even speaking, and they are the majority in Lahore and the areas around that, in the churches around that. Most of the properties left behind were of Hindus and Sikhs, and similarly the property was the main reason of the direction of migration after 47, and they played a very harrowing role, apart from the bloodshed, this lust for properties and all the corruption that took place. And similarly, the whole cities grew up like Faridabad and Gurgaon and others, around those refugees, and Abdul Kalam Azad was the minister in charge of refugees. And I think this is an important aspect of why even Punjabis from Punjab were not absorbed. And I think this brings us down to the question that any population uprooted from its motherland into a different area, even belonging to the same nationality, doesn't get easily absorbed in. And secondly, the existence of NPM in Karachi and the so-called Majra phenomenon shows that after 71 years, the Pakistani state has failed to create a nation state where it could absorb a population that has been migrated to because they wanted to create new Pakistan, new nation. It shows the total failure and the bankruptcy of the whole idea of Pakistan. And I think the last point I would like to make is that I think mainly because Bengal and Punjab were partition, bloodshed was far more. But I think it was because of that partition that ultimately the Punjabi suffered, the language suffered, the culture suffered. Even in the war, very few people speak Punjabi. Less people speak Punjabi than 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I think Rashid also touched that point. That in different periods of history, we have seen different recognition of self-identity by the population of people. That there is certain upsurge in the last struggle of the movement of the society, identity and your own acceptance of an identity or expression of identity is different. And this was not a work immediately before a few years ago. For the first time in the history of the subcontinent, it was the census of 1874 when for the first time even after census had this kind of census of the population. But it was under the British, under the Raj, that in 1874 they introduced this special bracket of race. It was never there before. And that was a very conscious effort because at that time, the British imperialism used to think for 100 years ahead. They used to plan quite long-term strategy because there were the imperial power, they were at the peak at that time. And I think there was a very interesting speech of Jinnah, and he was one of the main stalwarts of the leaders of the Congress. I think it was in the early, for the first, second decade of last century. It was a meeting of the Central Working Committee of the Congress, and Gandhi was sitting there. And obviously Jinnah and Gandhi didn't get together quite well. And he said, Mr. Corruption, you know that by using religion in politics, you are leading to the destruction of India. And ultimately, it's the historical irony that Jinnah played a role in that. But that's all I have to say.
You touched on a point which I forgot to mention in my notes. You mentioned how Delhi was transformed because of the influx of the from its old character, historical character, to a Muslim city. Became much more popular identity. It's the same thing happened in Karachi, which is touched on. You know, the wave of migrants, and largely Urdu speaking, but not only, not exclusively. They first came across through Wala, the housing camps here, refugee camps here, at Washington. And then gradually, incrementally made their way to Karachi. I think not simply because of evacuee property. In their case, it's also a question of going to the federal capital, where they thought employment and jobs and other opportunities would be more easily available. I.e., it was the heart of the state to which they were.
And of course, they were leading the movement themselves, because these are the UP Wallas who are at the heart of Pakistan.
They were the power.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions?
I just want to correct that it was not 1951. Rajasthani wrote that Pakistan ka Safarnama in 1962 after visiting Lahore in 1962. Well, it is not in 51. He came here to attend the centenary of
The point would be earlier.
It was written during his visit and then it was published later.
I think that's 51 is not mentioned here because it was not written and he didn't come here in 1951. Safarnama he wrote in 1962 when he came here to attend the government college centenary.
I was going by the translation that was...
And he did his masters from government college and he came to attend, he was invited especially to attend his sermon
When did he leave for India?
in 49.
I'll have a look. Shall I check it?
Leave.
You mentioned one aspect, we normally say that the partition and then bloodshed. So, and we say that there was no plan. So, the question is,
Maybe that was the plan.
the question is that we say partition, movement, no planning. Now let's look at it. That what was, if by any means, there was, whether there was a discussion on this, that the partition will lead to this manner of immigration or movement of or not. Whether that question was there in discussion or in newspapers, had it been there, so we could have thought that actually this was a question of the public concern. I have not came across anybody who has touched it from the historical perspective. So I think this area needs to be rediscovered. That what was the potential of this danger? One thing.
And
Because
how much awareness there was?
how much awareness was there? Because this question, being a question of people concern, a critical concern, an administrative concern, it bring to light that whether there was a negligence on which entity's part, or whether it was a planned or post when it was created. One aspect, I think that was less research needs to be answered in such discourse or working. Secondly,
Thank you very much. It was interesting.
Did you take your book?
Thank you.
I'll speak to you.
secondly, I think we touched a very good, although it has been appreciated twice. That's a women role, because women were one aspect, that they're looking at from the memory, from the inspiration, the relationships. I think that aspect has been less covered, because even I know from my personal account, reference and oral narration from a father, the train coming from Kashmir, stopped at Gujarat, all cut by the people, and he himself found people being slaughtered. And even after such a long time, I think there are so many people who have very vivid memories of all that. But there is no, especially on this side, I have not seen any museum. I've heard a lot of personal narrations, but there is no written, and we have rightly said that like in Bengal, that people have not written, but by actually in the context of the women who migrated from east side, they always relate stories, and their narration is much from the human and family and from the culture and from the tradition side. So that stories needs to be written, I think rewritten, because they will create a backdrop in which the context and the impact, the loss can be rightly assessed. Because again, it's from a personal context, because my mother's side moved from Amritsar. So their narration is from the social context of migration. First thing is the politically method, second is human side. And thirdly, when we look at the Punjab on the western side, gradually it became less developed, it became single community. And that was because the Indian side, India itself, by intrinsically was multicultural and multi-ethnic. So for them to have diversity is a part of their bigger reality. For us to have concentration of a certain faith was again a political impact over here. So if we look at it from the side, from the context of the bigger political environment in Western Punjab, its environment changed went to a different tangent from the eastern side. So that actually, when we compare the two Punjabs, I just wonder, looking forward, that if we want to although a lot of friends come from there, and I have been personally gone there. So I think that it's very easy in terms of food, language, and Delhi is so much like Lahore that I could not find any difference. And many roads I found that I was moving Lahore, very fair. Especially around the Qila and all those areas, I thought it was like Lahore. So I don't find any difference at all.
Old Delhi is like that.
Yes.
But the newer part, the imperial Delhi is not like that.
So I think actually this, if I look forward to, that if we want that, if even the borders are to go, tomorrow becomes less stringent, that what would be the impact? I just try to conceive that way, that in terms of politically, it's a separate province. But what intellectual or the inspirational changes will it bring to this side if it becomes less stringent a border? So I think that also, if someone comment on that because that gives a forward view that if it's a less mobile, what would the political impact and what the social and the cultural impact?
I think one indication of that is whenever Pakistanis go to India or Indians come to Pakistan, what is the reception they receive and what are their comments after? We just had an Indian royal delegation. Look at what they're saying. So much love, so much warmth, so much acceptance. And this is a narrative you'll hear whenever any side visits the other. So it is a process of rediscovery of the lost other. And the impact, if you'll pardon my saying so, will be that these rigid walls that have divided us for 71 years are in danger of crumbling.
I mean, sorry.
थोड़ी गल करना चाह रहा था द पार्टीशन की बुनियाद ये मेरी काफ़ी
पंजाबी जा गए
वो गल है मेरी डॉक्टर साहब ने वजूहात बेसिस ऑफ द पार्टीशन हिस्टोरिकल रेफरेंस दे के वो बयान करने की एक उन्होंने अपनी गलबात किया है उनको नहीं पता थोड़ी किताब के जो कंटेंट ने और क्या 1919 जिहदे विच असीं 2019 दे विच बैठे हैं पूरे 100 साल पहला 1919 का वाकया जलियांवाला बाग का उतों जी गल शुरू होती है हिंदुस्तान की आज़ादी की और वो अगर असी वाइडर एक ग्लोबल लेवल पर देखिए तो अज बहुत सारे मुल्कों के अंदर वो बाग जोड़ा है वो फैलिया हुआ है और उसे अमेरिकन इंपीरियलिज्म और इंटरनेशनल इस्टेब्लिशमेंट और इंटरनेशनल इंपीरियलिज्म को जलियांवाला बाग मुख्तलिफ शहरों के शाम हलब ख़त्म हो गया है और इराक खंडर बन गया है अफगानिस्तान तो गल मैं करना चाह रहा था कि मैं किताब के कंटेंट का पता नहीं है कि क्या जलियांवाला बाग का जिक्र है कि जितों गल शुरू हुई और अगर वो नहीं है कि 1919 की बात सादत हसन भुट्टो की कहानी जी है वो सानू पता चलता है कि अंग्रेज़ों ने 1919 के बीच क्योंकि वो पैदा होया 1912 और भगत सिंह पैदा होया 1907 जलियांवाला बाग के वक्त भगत सिंह की उम्र थोड़ी जी उम्र से होती लेकिन वो 12 साल की उम्र जलियांवाला बाग के जाके बैठ के अंग्रेज़ों के बारे सोचता रहता सी और प्लानिंग करता रहता सी इस किताब के जिंदगी थोड़ी जी गुफ्तगू है वो ही गुफ्तगू हो सकती ना पढ़ी ना वो कंटेंट का सानू पता है कि की लिखा गया पार्टीशन के ना गांधी नेहरू पटेल आज़ाद खान तो अलावा डॉक्टर साहब की जिनकी बहुत नज़दीक ने ख्याल और नज़रियात इन्हों की कम्यूनिस्ट पार्टी ऑफ इंडिया भी शामिल है उन्होंने रेजोल्यूशन भी शामिल है और उन्होंने अंदर तब्दीली बहुत जल्दी आई पाकिस्तान जमात इस्लामी और खुदाई खिदमतगार और हुर और नामा ने को अपना एहरार जोड़े सर उनके खिलाफ सन जो जोड़े इंडियन नेशनलिस्ट मुस्लिम्स were against the partition, but the Communist Party was in favor of the partition. Pakistan बनाने में the Communist Party का भी हिस्सा शामिल है। ये बड़े diverse ਸਬਜੈਕਟਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਰੀਡਿਸਕਵਰ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਰਾਸ਼ੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਤੋਂ ਸਮਝ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੰਪੈਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਲੁਧਿਆਣਾ ਔਰ ਰਾਏਪੁਰ ਦਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਕਮਨੈਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਔਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਫੈਸਲਾਬਾਦ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਾਏਪੁਰ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸਮੈਨ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਕਾਰੋਬਾਰ ਚਲਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਉੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਰਹਿਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਲੁਧਿਆਣਾ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ
हाँ, है दोनों रेफ्यूजी हाँ और दोनों रेफ्यूजी है एंड एक्चुअली जी उस तो अलावा जी होर जी गल है ना किताब कि पॉलिटिक्स का चलो ठीक है, किसी ने लोगों ने नहीं पूछा कि तुसी चाह रहे हो कि नहीं चाह रहे, ठीक उन्होंने फैसला कर लिया, डेक्लेरेशन हो गई, जो प्लान बन गया तो क्या था कि आप फैसला आया तो आप पार्टीशन करी। पर मेरा मकसद आ किताब के यही सीगा कि एक्चुअली जो लोग से आम जनता आम आवाम जी है कि उन्होंने की होया कि उन्होंने जो पोलिटिकल डिसीजन था उन्होंने किस तरह प्रोसेस करके उन्होंने जड़िया जिंदगियां एकदम तबाह हो जाती एंड उन्होंने फिर किस तरह दोबारा अपनी जिंदगी शुरू की।
लेकिन वो किताब शुरू होएगा लेकिन ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਐਸ਼ਿਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਜਿਸ ਰਾਖ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ 47 ਬਣਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਬਿਆਨ ਕੀਤੇ। ਉਹ ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਐਸਾ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਪਸੰਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਗੈਰ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਪਸੰਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਹੈ ਮੰਟੋ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਬੇਦੀ ਕ੍ਰਿਸ਼ਨ ਆਯਾਤੁੱਲਾ ਅੰਸਾਰੀ ਅਮਰਤਾ ਪ੍ਰੀਤਮ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਕੋਈ ਨਜ਼ਮ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਲਿਖੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਤਸੱਵਰ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ। यशवंत सिंह ट्रेन बट अमरता प्रीतम तुसी गुरुविशी की गल की है ना, गुरुविशी की गल है वो 20 साल की गल है। अमरता ने तो 47 ने जी नजम लिखी थी सी आजादी
मैं जिक्र किया है कि एक्चुअली जो लिटरेचर आ
जी
जो लिटरेचर लिख रहे हैं वो ही पहला इदा का काम शुरू करते हैं, पर उन्होंने ये है ना कि वो एक फिक्शन या लिटरेचर की लेंस के थ्रू आ चीज़ों बारे गल कर रहे हैं ना, पर हम जो बाकी का काम हो रहा वो तो हिस्टोरिकल परस्पेक्टिव तो ना एक होर डिसिप्लिन के थ्रू देखते हैं, पर एक्चुअली पहला काम तो तुम देख लो फिल्मां भी मिलन लग गया कुछ चंद फिल्मां हैगियां सीगियां 40s 50s ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਰਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਬਾਰੇ, ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, बट हिस्ट्री जो डॉक्यूमेंट्स या कह लो कि फैसला अकाउंट्स वो तो 50 साल बाद जाके यूज करते हैं ना। एंड उर्विशी ने क्यों आ काम शुरू किया ਉਹਦਾ इंपैक्ट एंड उन्होंने झटका लगा 1984 जो दिल्ली राइट्स होए सी उत्थे जो कुछ इमरजेंसी नहीं इमरजेंसी नहीं जो उन्होंने इंदिरा गांधी मारता उस तो बाद 3 दिन दिल्ली के सारे सिखा टारगेट करके मारे आ कांग्रेस की गाल नहीं हो रहा उस तो बाद उन्होंने झटका लगता है तो वो जिहड़ियां गल्लां दस रहे थे उस वेले वो कह रहे थे कि तो सानू 47 याद आ गया कुछ हो गया इट्स अ रिपीट एंड वही तो फिर उर्वशी जाके दोबारा शुरू कर दिया कि 47
तो मैं कह रहा था हाँ भाई जड़ी चीज़ को याद नहीं रखोगे यू आर कंडेम्ड टू रिपीट इट।
I was in Delhi in 84 और I was staying with the General Secretary, there was Sundar Singh Chachi and to see his state of mind I went to a friend of his, Shamlal, a Hindu who was an industrialist with factories and people, and then Sachi went up to him and this said state of mind. Also, this was really I think the general of the Indian Army telling his lifelong friend, कि ऐसी तरह ये सकती कहते तो ऐसी निकल जाने क्योंकि एक कंडीशन में 47 हो जाती है। And I was General Chachi's guest, he took me home तो आई थिंक 84 दिल्ली was very hard.
देखो खेड खेडियां ने रियासत इंदिरा गांधी ने खेड खेडिया बड़ा खतरनाक
सारे
इंदिरा वाले ने नाल किनू थले कर ली अकाली दल वो फिर गल रह गया प्रॉक्सीज का पता ना तो ये सब तो पुरानी प्रॉक्सी याद आ रही है होर प्रॉक्सीज की मिसाला मैं अगर देता चला तो आपको समझ आ रही है कि कहने की कोशिश एक कितना खतरनाक खेड है इंदिरा गांधी को पता चले या नहीं पता चले सानू नहीं पता चल रहा असी की कर लिया अपने आप नाल प्रॉक्सी की वजह नाल
गोल्डन टेम्पल में म्यूजियम है आप नहीं है उसमें उसके नैरेटिव्स जो हैं वो अगर आप पढ़ें उसमें ये बाकायदा बने थे पर उस तरफ नहीं जाने देते लेकिन बिल्कुल छोड़ देते उसमें ये लिखा हुआ था कि हम इसका बदला भी हम लेंगे हमने कभी ऐसा नहीं हुआ कि बदला न लिया और हम इसका बदला भी लेंगे लेकिन ये सारी यानी ये जो फॉल्स आप कह सकते हैं कंस्ट्रक्ट है नेशन ग्रुप का रिलीजन ये क्यों इतना इस तरीके से सक्सेसफुल हुआ 47 में और फिर
उससे पहले
भी लेकिन
शुरुआत तो पहले
फिर 71 में हमारे यहाँ दूसरा नैरेटिव कैसे सक्सेसफुल हुआ जो रिलीजन पे बिल्कुल बेस्ड थी
No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, how do you see this? I mean, मेरा तो ये ना कि actually, for me, there are many numerous examples where women are used as pawns in conflict. And one of the ways I actually, again, sort of going back to this, कि क्यों इस तरह की कहानियाँ शुरू होंदियां हैं? Because actually, वो Yugoslavia from Yugoslavia ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ जो कुछ होया, वो सारी genocide ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, Rwanda ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, Bosnia ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, why is it that women are continually used as pawns in conflict? क्योंकि देखो ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ context ज़्यादा इज्जत ਦਾ है ना कि ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਨੂੰ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ।
So it's a weapon.
It's a weapon and 71 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਉਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ erase ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ by completely erasing this.
That's not
हाँ and this is very dark. I mean, ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ
I read something else from this 47. Showed the cathedral. Most of the women were raised.
I'm sorry, मैं
आपके सवाल के जवाब
पौधे को उस पर
2 मिनट लगेंगे तो आपके सवाल का जवाब
हाँ सर
2 मिनट देते जाना मैं अगेन एक्सपर्ट नहीं हूँ थोड़ा बहुत मैं पढ़िया सीखा है एक थेरी है ना डिवाइड एंड रूल वाली बरतानिया ने सानू बंटवारा कराया साडा या सानू लगा करता है दूसरे को और उनकी वजह यह है कि 1857 में जी रिवोल्ट हुई वो असी इकट्ठे से क्योंकि कई ऐसी मिसालां तो मिल जाएगियाँ कि मुसलमान रूलर जो है हिंदू जनरल है हिंदू राजा या रानी है मुस्लिम जनरल है ये मामूल सी उस वे बरतानिया के आने तो पहले ये मामूल सी तो एक थेरी ये है कि जड़ा जी बगावत हुई वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस असीं कहने वो वजह नाल एक प्लैनिंग की गई कि इन्हों किसी तरह डिवाइड किया जाए और 1874 का सेंसस का भी हवाला दिता गया लेकिन मेरा ख्याल है बहुत ईजी और फेसाल एक्सप्लेनेशन इसलिए कि मैं जरा पढ़िया मैनू ये समझ आई है कि 2 चीज़ें हो रही हैं सन पैरल एक ते एक हिंदू रिवाइवलिस्ट मूवमेंट चली और बिलखसूस बंगाल लास्ट क्वार्टर ऑफ द 19th सेंचुरी और वेस्टर्न सारा मौजूद है, और दूसरी तरफ मुस्लिम आर्म्स कि भाई साडा की बनेगा, एम्पायर गया अभी तो लग गए खुडे लाइन या सानू उड़ा दिता। तो Sir Sayyid Khan and others trying to then revive or in some way save the Muslim community in India. So these are parallel things that are going on, and I think अगर मैं अंग्रेज होंदा उस वेले इंपीरियल पावर, मैं कहता यार तो बड़ी खूबसूरत मौका है इन्होंने वंडन का, तो हो सकता है कि वंडन का प्रोग्राम होवे भी और वंडन ਲਈ मवाद जड़ा है वो असी मुहैया करना। तो ये दोनों चीज़ां रलियां हो सकती हैं, मिलियां हो सकती हैं। ऑफकोर्स उसका नतीजा की निकलिया, मैं एक कहने की कोशिश कर रहा कि जहाँ साढ़े नाल 19वीं सदी हो गया वो फिर तो असी दौरान से मजबूर हो रहे हैं क्योंकि असी याद नहीं करते। मेमोरी हिस्ट्री की इंपॉर्टेंस में इस बात Sir, thank you for coming. Thank you sir, अलग मुलाकात होनी है, ना सिर्फ बड़े सदीर के बारे में, पाकिस्तान के बारे में।